Take this.
GMO. It means God move over. So here's what a GMO is, okay? You take a gene, let's say you want to create a corn plant engineered to produce its own pesticide, to split open the stomach of insects and kill them. Okay, just pick one at random, which happens to be planted all over the country. So you take a gene from soil bacterium called Bacillus thuringiensis. It's BT. Now some of the farmers and gardeners may know BT. You can buy it at a gardening store. You spray it when there's an insect infestation of certain type of insects. It'll kill those insects. And it does not say also use as mouthwash. It says do not take internally. But what happens with these biotech companies is they take the gene that produces the BT out of the bacterium and they make millions of copies and they put it into a gun and they shoot the gun into a plate of millions of corn cells and they clone those cells into crops, and those plants have a little spray bottle in every single cell. So if you happen to be the unfortunate insect that eats any part of the plant, you're dead. Now the insecticide is in our food, and the plant is considered a registered pesticide. Now whether the thing is, it's a lot of things, this whole thing about GMOs, it's a lot of things, but it's not sex. It's not sexual reproduction, which is natural breeding, which is what we've been doing, what we've been seeing for our crops and our environment forever. And the biotech industry claims that that GMOs is just an extension of natural breeding. And this is one of their myths. It's completely false. So GMOs are swapping genes from one species into other species. They've done some amazing combinations. They have puppies that glow in the dark. They have spider genes put into goats in hopes that they can milk the goat to get spiderweb protein to make bulletproof vests. It's just crazy. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Although they do, they make it up. It's like mad scientists. Let's see what we can do to this. And you can just mix and match all sorts of things. Basically, you're taking a gene produces a protein, originally they thought every trait has a different protein attached to it. That was completely wrong, but so it's entirely based on false information, but this is what they do. Now, these are the crops: soy, corn, cotton, and canola, Hawaiian papaya, zucchini, crookneck squash, sugar beets, and alfalfa is new. Those are the only 9 GMO food crops on the market. Tomatoes were taken off the market, potatoes were taken off the market. The seedless grapes and watermelons are not GMO. It's just these. Now, the reason why we're eating GMOs is traced back to our Food and Drug Administration, which boldly claimed that we don't see any difference. And because they say we don't see any difference, even saying we're not aware of any information showing that the foods are significantly different, they said, the big biotech company Monsanto, who told us that PCBs, Agent Orange, and DDT were safe, they can determine whether GMOs are safe, and they don't have to tell the FDA or the American people. They can put it on the market with no required safety studies. So there is no approval of GMOs from the FDA. They are not approved. There's a voluntary consultation process. At the end of the meaningless exercise, companies like Monsanto get a letter which says from the FDA, it reminds them that it's their job to determine if their foods are safe. That's it. It says, you believe that your foods are safe, fine. And you also have determined that there's no issue that needs to be evaluated by the FDA. And this is, they just handed whatever junk science they want to give in, the tobacco science, which we have shown to be completely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Here's an example. Bovine growth hormone. How many people have heard of bovine growth hormone? Okay, they take cow genes, put it into E. coli, and poof, they create hormones that normally the cows produce. So then they put huge amounts of hormones into the cow, revs up the cow, it's like crack for cows, and it creates mastitis, which is an udder infection, which increases the pus in the milk, which increases the antibiotics used in the milk, increases the bovine growth hormone in the milk, and increases IGF-1 in the milk. IGF-1 is linked to cancer. So someone from Monsanto told me that when his 3 scientist colleagues found so much IGF-1 in the milk, because they were doing the safety studies for the company, these 3 Monsanto scientists refused to drink milk thereafter, unless it was organic. One bought his own cow. They were unwilling to drink the milk if the cows had been injected with Monsanto's bovine growth hormone. Now, I talked to a veterinarian who used to work at the FDA, and he was testing. He was requiring tests. See, they don't test at the FDA, they just let the companies do the tests. And he was describing the rigged research that Monsanto and others were doing, and how they would just eliminate sick cows from the study. And he was requiring more studies, and he was fired because he was holding up the approval process. He sued and got reinstated, but they wouldn't let him deal with milk again because he knew too much. So the FDA put out an article in Science magazine to defend their approval of RBGH. They'd never done that before, put an article in a Science magazine. And they said, there's no significant increase in bovine growth hormone. But even if there were, it wouldn't matter because bovine growth hormone is destroyed during pasteurization. And so that was one paragraph dismissing that concern, like that. Okay, we checked the references, and it was a study done by friends of Monsanto. And they didn't use Monsanto's bovine growth hormone. They used another company's at 2% of the dose normally used by Monsanto. They did a daily dose instead of an every 2 weeks. And it increased 34%. A hormone increasing 34%. That's a significant increase, in my opinion, for a hormone. Hormones are pretty powerful, but they considered it insignificant. And again, it was only 2% of the dose. But then they said, don't worry, it's destroyed during pasteurization. Well, they pasteurized the milk in the study 120 times longer than normal. But they only destroyed 19%, not 90% that was quoted by the FDA. That wasn't good enough for the researchers, so they added powdered hormone to the milk in huge quantities. And then they pasteurized it 120 times longer than normal. Under those conditions, they destroyed 90%. And that's what the FDA reported. Here's another one. This is actually my favorite of the rigged research. There's all sorts of things we have on them. I mean, we catch them absolutely red-handed, and they still get away with it because they're louder than we are. They can reach millions of people with lies. So here's another one. They put a gene from soil organisms into corn to produce more lysine for pig feed. And they applied for approval in Australia. And they said, oh, the protein that's produced by this inserted gene, it has a history of safe use in the food supply because it's in the soil. And we obviously eat a lot of soil. I don't know about you, but I just chow down with that. So a friend of mine in New Zealand, scientist, he decided to do the calculation. And he took the average American male consumer, how much corn does he eat? Then figured if all that corn was Monsanto's high lysine variety, how much of that protein would he eat? Now, how much soil would he have to consume in order to have the equivalent dose? 22,000 pounds per second. They were off by several trillion. 22,000 pounds. I mean, I don't even want to imagine what that's like. Dump truck, back it up, keep it going, keep it going. So these guys have, you know, crazy assumptions, wrong detection methods. Anyway, this is the companies that we're deciding should determine if our foods are safe. You know, when Monsanto had PCBs going, they had a factory in Anniston, Alabama, and they knew they were poisoning the town. They put a fish into the river. They hired a consultant who did this. Within a minute, the fish died, shed its skin, floated to the top, and spurted blood. And this was because of Monsanto's PCB discharge. And Monsanto refused to do anything about this except continuing to poison this town, and they got convicted, and they got fined $700 million. And, I mean, aspartame. How many people still eat aspartame and will admit it in public? How many people eat aspartame and won't admit it in public? Aspartame. Donald Rumsfeld was the CEO of the company that put aspartame on the market. All right? FDA wanted to sue the company for fraud because evidently they threw out tumors from the rats before they did the autopsies. And so the lawyers who were the prosecutors, there was a primary and a secondary. The primary one quit his job and joined the law firm of the aspartame company. Then the deputy prosecutor took over. He first let the statute of limitations run out and then quit his job and got paid $400,000 to work for the law firm of the opposing side. And the FDA still wanted to ban it. But the day Reagan got in, he said to the FDA commissioner, you can no longer enact any laws or rules. Rumsfeld was friends with Reagan, and Rumsfeld's friend became the commissioner of the FDA, and he approved aspartame, and it became the subject of 80% of all consumer complaints in a single year for any food additive. And the FDA divided the complaints into 92 or 93 different categories, including brain tumors, seizures, etc. So this is and Monsanto bought the company that produced aspartame. So these are the companies that are completely in charge of determining if the foods are safe. Now, the FDA said, we don't see any problems. They were lying. The person in charge of policy was Michael Taylor, Monsanto's former attorney. He was in charge of policy at the FDA. He's the one that allowed this sentence, probably wrote it himself, to be there as the justification for saying no labeling, no testing, no nothing. And it was a complete lie, because documents made public from a lawsuit years after this 1992 policy was enacted showed that the overwhelming consensus among the scientists at the FDA were that GMOs were different and dangerous and could lead to allergies, toxins, new diseases, and nutritional problems. But the White House had instructed the FDA to promote biotechnology, so they created a new position specifically for Michael Taylor, and then Taylor became Monsanto's vice president, and now he's the US food safety czar. So he was put back into the FDA by Obama. And the Obama administration has been worse on GMOs than the Bush administration. Now, the first GM crop to be evaluated by the Obama administration, by the FDA, excuse me. FDA, the enforcement wing of Monsanto, was Flavor Saver tomato, but it didn't have much flavor to savor. So it got thrown off the market soon after because it was mealy and tasteless. But it was the first GM crop to be looked at by this consultation process, and it was the only company that actually gave raw feeding study data. They don't give raw feeding study data to the FDA. They give summaries, they give conclusions. There's no way you can determine if something is safe by the junk that they give the FDA. And if the FDA investigators ask for more information, they're typically ignored because it's completely voluntary and they don't have to pass anything on. But this company wanted it to be looked at in detail. And they did a rat feeding study, and the rats refused to eat the tomato. Let's hear it for those rats. All right. I think they missed their calling. They should have said, Are you looking for rat-proof tomatoes? Try ours, even the rats won't eat them. I had to weigh in my mind about whether I wanted to name my first book, Stop Eating What the Rats Rejected. But I'm going to be coming out with a t-shirt next month for that. So it's not just rats. It's actually, from eyewitness reports all over North America, it's cows, pigs, geese, squirrels, deer, raccoons, mice, rats, chickens, and buffalo. So it's our job to get humans up to the level of animals. I wrote about the animals' scenarios and the eyewitness reports in one page before each chapter of Seeds of Deception. And there's a story about squirrels that refused to eat the GM corn that was nailed to a tree in Iowa in the cold winter days. And they were eating the non-GMO fine. And then someone else did the same experiment in Illinois and found similar results. And his neighbor wanted to try it. So he bought a bag of GM corn on the cob, a bag of non-GM corn, put it away for the winter, forgot about it, discovered it in the summer, then discovered that the mice had done the research for him. You can see they completely devoured all the non-GM corn and never touched the GM corn. Getting back to the tomatoes, they force-fed the tomatoes to these finicky rats, and 7 developed stomach lesions and 7 of 40 died within 2 weeks. Now, in the UK, it's a very pro-GM government, and they wanted to convince a skeptical public that GMOs were safe. So they actually gave $3 million to this man, Dr. Arpad Pusztai, world's leading researcher in his field, to figure out how to test for the safety of GMOs. And he was supposed to come up with the protocol to put into the EU law so that any product to be approved would have to go through his testing protocol. So he took potatoes, engineered to produce an insecticide, and he took that GM potato, along with a complete and balanced diet, and fed it to a group of rats. Then he fed another group of rats non-GM potatoes, exactly the same type of potatoes. Then a third group of rats, non-GM potatoes, plus he spiked their diet with the same insecticide that the GM potato produced. So you have GM potato, non-GM potato, non-GM potato, plus insecticide. Only the GM potato caused serious damage. What was the cause? It was not the insecticide. It was somehow the process of genetic engineering that caused potentially precancerous cell growth, smaller brains, livers, and testicles, partial atrophy of the liver, and damaged immune system. Here's the picture of the intestinal lining on the right from the rats fed the GM. Here's the stomach lining. I spent some time this past week with 2 physicians. One's a pediatrician, one's a family practitioner. And they were both convinced that the digestive tract of North Americans, certainly of their clients, is becoming damaged. They see this unprecedented rise, even in very little kids, where kids are not digesting, allergic reactions, and they pointed to this particular study as one of the problems that may be causing this. Because it wasn't the particular insecticide that caused the problem. It was somehow the process of genetic engineering. The same process that created the soy and the corn and other products on the market that created this potato, which is not on the market. There's some other things that may be causing this problem in human beings and of late, and I'll go over that. We'll have some time to talk about that. I'm going to describe 5 categories of things that can go wrong. And before I do, I just realized I should describe the fate of Dr. Arpad Pusztai. Let's go back and take a look at him. He's a friend of mine. Things didn't go so well for him. He discovered the problems with the rats, was invited to speak on television, got permission from his director, described that He didn't think GMOs should be fed to human beings because we'd be like the guinea pigs, because he knew absolutely the terrible research that was being done. He knew that if his potatoes had been tested by Monsanto or Bayer or these other GM crop companies, they would have passed onto the market. Because they didn't look for potentially precancerous cell growth. They didn't weigh the organs. They didn't look at the immune system. He said reading their research was a turning point in his life because he couldn't believe how poor and absolutely dangerous that research was. So he, in his 2.5 minute talk, was expressing concern. And he became a hero, absolute hero. He was a hero at his institute, he was a hero in the press. He was a man standing up, the top researcher in his field, the one who was doing the safety studies on GMOs, saying GMOs were unsafe. His director took over all of the media. Actually, without even telling Arpad, he just forwarded all the calls and all the faxes to his own office so he could tout how brilliant the research was and how much he was thinking that the institute was going to get a lot of money to do a lot of repeat research. Now, this director was being groomed by the UK Prime Minister to be in charge of the new Food Standards Agency that was to be happening soon. And he was shocked on Tuesday afternoon between 3 and 5 to receive 2 calls from the UK Prime Minister's office. We don't know exactly who was on the other line. We don't know exactly what was said. But the next day, the director fired Arpad Pusztai after 35 years. He said if he speaks at all about his research, he would be sued. They disbanded the research team, never implemented the protocols, and embarked on a campaign to destroy Pusztai's reputation, putting out lie after lie in order to protect the reputation of GMOs. After 7 months, Pusztai's gag order was lifted by an order of Parliament. He got the data back. This picture is in The Lancet, as this one, top journal. And when he was able to go public, an amazing thing happened. 700 articles were written within a month. People all over Europe started buzzing about GMOs. People were concerned about GMOs.
What year was that?
This was in 1999. Now, this was completely unexpected, but it was devastating to the fortunes of the biotech industry. Because at the end of April, about 10 weeks from the gag order being lifted, Unilever publicly committed to stop using GM ingredients in its European brands. And by the end of the week, so did almost everyone else. This was in sharp contrast to the biotech industry's projections, which were revealed in a January 1999 conference in San Francisco, where they projected a 95% takeover of all commercial seeds in the world by 2004. They were planning to replace virtually everything we eat with genetically modified foods. And because of Arpad Pusztai and the gag order being lifted, that's what derailed their train. I want to go through 5 categories of things that can go wrong. The first category, we've already been told about. It's the process. Now, we know that you use a gene gun to insert, or you use bacterial infection, and you clone the crop. If you took even the same gene from the same plant and just replaced it, you took it out and put it back in, the process causes massive collateral damage. 2 to 4% of the DNA is different. Mutations, hundreds or thousands of mutations up and down the DNA. Up to 5% of the naturally functioning genes can change their levels of expression, spewing out maybe allergens or toxins or carcinogens or anti-nutrients or something healthy. You don't know. It's a genetic roulette. And as I gave this book out to political leaders around the world, I was in about 25 countries, and I realized by that time, I knew for sure, I hand this book to cabinet ministers, others. They didn't have time to read it. They would have me sign it. I'd be very flattered. There's a cabinet minister, a senior official, and I'd be signing the book for him. And he said, thank you very much, and maybe he'd hand it to an assistant, and that would be the last time he'd see it. I realized they don't have a lot of time. So I needed to write something for the leaders. But by this time, we were also completely confident that we were winning every debate against the scientists who were saying that GMOs were safe, because we had all of the data showing that they were either lying or basing their arguments on untested assumptions. So for them, I had to write like a textbook or detailed information. So I was like, how do I write for the politician and some of the scientists or the staff? So I decided to write a book for both of them, where the pages are 2-page spreads. The left side is a summary for the attention deficit politician, and the right side are detailed reference texts for anyone. So you can just flip through and just read the left side. Just read the left side, and there's a way to use this if you want to be an educator. What you do is you say, you just have to read this sentence. And you can read the quote from the bullet points and the quote from the scientist, but that's all. And then you turn to the next one, and they start reading, and before they finish the sentence, you start to the next one. And before they finish the sentence, they start reading, and then they take it out of your hands. And, because you have to open it to show people, because it's just too intimidating. So what I did is I described 65 health risks of GMOs, and so now we're going to do the second half of the lecture, which is about the health dangers in terms of these 5 of the 8 categories I discussed. Can I hand this to you?